All right. Good morning, everyone. In Chicago, it's slightly overcast, but you can smell spring turning into summer. My name is Stephanie Frank, and I'm the Deputy Director of Planning, Performance, and Federal Projects for the Department of Human Services, Division of Substance Use Prevention and Recovery. The Gambling Initiative falls under our division in Illinois. I want to welcome you on behalf of myself, Director Jones, and the Illinois Gambling Team, Jim Wilkerson, Kelly Gage, Gadjef McNeil, and Terrence Stone. This is Illinois' annual gambling conference. And right now you're all wondering, did I miss last year's conference? Maybe they didn't have it because of COVID. Well, this conference is not the first in Illinois, but it's been a long time since we had one. So we're resurrecting it. I even resurrected a blazer from the back of my closet to wear to treat this day and conference with the respect it deserves. I know these virtual conferences sometimes tempt us to multitask and to do other work while we are listening, but I urge you to give yourself a break and to listen and to do only one thing. We have arranged for some great speakers. Our partners, Morneau Shepell, have brought in national speakers who are experts, who are exciting. And Dan, the one that follows this, Dan is a well-known and well-respected and well-loved, and I think that you will love it. So please put your multitasking aside and welcome to Illinois' annual gambling conference.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yep.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. It is 10 a.m. here in sunny New Jersey, where we touched 88 degrees yesterday. High taxes and high temperatures. That's what we're known for now this time of year. We've gone right from winter to summer. Good to see some familiar names in the chat. I was just eyeballing. I see Robbie's here. I just saw Robbie yesterday, so good to see you, Robbie. And we have a lot to cover in a very short period of time today. But it's important that we level set and we're all on the same page. We're talking about problem gambling. What is it? What does it look like? Why is it important to consider? Throughout the next 2 days, you're going to hear a range of speakers talking about a topic that historically people gamble on anything. Over 90% of Americans can gamble normally. People can gamble on lottery tickets, horses, casinos, sports. You get young people that flip baseball cards at an early age. You hear terminology. It says, I bet I can run to the other side of the playground faster than you for a soda, right? It starts at an early age. Gambling is normalized in American culture. It's normalized around the globe. The concept of taking a risk in hopes of winning something of value, where there's that uncertainty. There's just something that feels good. And over the next 55 minutes or so, we're going to talk about why some people develop a problem. Gambling is something that is fun. It's a form of entertainment for most people. It's a way to pass time. But for others, it starts to become problematic. It starts to create issues such as preoccupation, isolation, withdrawal, this constant thinking about when's the next time that I can gamble? When's the next time that I can go to the casino? As gambling expands and sweeps the nation, both for sports betting and internet gambling, when's the next time I can log on to the app on my smartphone and place a bet? And so we need to think about the potential unintended consequences of gambling expansion. How do we best treat the problem gambler and loved ones? Let's not forget about the loved ones. Anytime we're talking addiction and recovery, we need to treat not just the person with the addiction, but the support network, the loved ones, the pillars of strength that the individual will need in their journey of recovery. So today we hope to cover just the basics, the 101. Yes, there'll be other topics throughout the day. We're going to have a sports betting panel. There's going to be a roundtable discussion where we receive a lot of questions about the similarities between day trading and gambling. We're getting a lot of questions on that. We're seeing Robinhood, we're seeing Dogecoin, we're seeing cryptocurrency, people buying and selling fantastic amounts of money at rapid rates of speed. Can that become problematic? And what we realize is that at times it's more about the behavior than whether or not something is actually considered gambling. Take fantasy sports contests, for example. In many states, daily fantasy sports contests run by the DraftKings, FanDuels, and others are not considered forms of gambling. Yet our 800 Gambler helpline receives phone calls from people who have spent a lot of money and a lot of resources and time on daily fantasy sports, and it's created problems in their life. So sometimes it doesn't matter if it's legal or illegal. It doesn't matter if it's gambling or not gambling. If something starts to create harm in someone's life, it needs to be addressed. So I'm thankful to be here today. I am the Assistant Executive Director with the New Jersey Council on Compulsive Gambling, better known as 800 Gambler. And the reason I love the work that I do is that I myself am a gambler in recovery over 11 years now. February 11th, 2010 was the day I last felt the need to place a bet. So I come to you today both with knowledge, but also with experience, learned experience, lived experience on the nature of gambling addiction, starting at a very early age when I grew up with my father and my brother when we were going to the racetrack every Friday and Saturday night. So let's get into today. Let's start with a video. I do like to mix up the learning. Please use the chat today for questions and comments. Use the Q&A area for questions and comments as well. This training is for you, so make it valuable. Right? Take something away today that you learn that's new or that you've learned differently. Perhaps we're changing thinking, we're changing perceptions, right? We want to understand what is something new that you take away from today or something that you heard differently. This video is from the British Broadcasting Corporation. It's about a 4-minute video. And what they did is they put a gambler inside an MRI scanner and took a look at his brain while he was gambling. I think it's very important that we do understand the brain as a person is gambling and a little bit of the activity that's going on. Take a look at this video.
It's getting me excited already.
We arranged for gambler Tony Franklin to join a unique experiment by one of the world's leading experts on addiction, Professor David Nutt.
No, it's a mistake.
Gambling addiction is not a failure of will. It is a brain disorder which is preyed upon by the gambling industry.
Honestly, I can feel my heartbeat just rising, just looking at the damn thing.
Once you become addicted, it's very, very hard to stop because you've changed your brain. Addiction is a brain that has changed to become entrained to the desires of the gambling.
So we're going to start the roulette task, Tony.
This will be the first time anyone plays something similar to a fixed odds betting terminal from inside an MRI scanner. The professor says it will reveal what's happening in Tony's brain as he uses a keypad to bet.
Got £1,000 to spend. Can I spend it all on the first spin?
When Tony is doing his task, when he's looking at the roulette wheel and he's making a decision to bet, parts of the brain get turned on and then they can't stop. And we think there's probably a chemical basis to that. So that's what we're expecting to see, that the habit centers are overactivated in people with gambling compared with normal people like us. The brain's not very active. Maybe a little bit here, he's thinking at the, what shall I do? But it's pretty calm. Contrast that with what happens in the next one. And
That's a huge difference from
indeed
there to there.
Exactly.
So that's in a matter of seconds as well, would it be?
Exactly.
Or?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So here we see the visual system, the back of the brain here, intensely activated. He's watching really closely. He wants that ball bearing to come down on his color. And now we look at the emotional regions. And these are different regions activated. This is the anterior cingulate cortex. This is the insular. And these are the two areas of the brain which make sense of emotions. They may generate the emotion he's feeling of excitement. Will I win? Won't I win? And here we see very similar picture. In fact, the only real difference between winning and anticipating is this area here. And this is an area where I think we see the sense of satisfaction. Yeah, I've won. That's good. Register that. Start again. But overall, winning and waiting to see if you've won, the anticipation, they're both pretty much the same. And that's a really key point about gambling. It's not just the winning that counts. It's the taking part. And the taking part repeatedly when you don't win is as activating to a gambler as the winning. When you're sitting at a fixed odd terminal, you're getting this every 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So you can have hundreds of them. And so that process can become, in the end, it becomes kind of habitual, it becomes addictive.
It's not just the winning that counts. For those of you that are new to the field of addiction or new to the concept of diving in deeper on gambling addiction, he said something very critical, right? It's not just the participation, it's also the anticipation, right? So you're expecting, you're looking forward to the win, you're actively taking part in it. And then when you get a win, yes, there's a dopamine burst, register that, do it again. It's this constant, it's the entire process of gambling that can make it so addicting to some people. And it's an emotional issue. It's the emotional regions of the brain. Gambling addiction is not a money problem. I want to be very clear on that. Gambling addiction is not a money problem. Most people with a gambling addiction will say, oh, I have a money problem. If I had more money, I wouldn't have a gambling problem because I'm just waiting for that wheel to land on the outcome that I need. Eventually, it's going to happen. I'm due. These are all the arguments you will hear a gambler say. I'm due. The casino has my money and they're going to give it back to me soon as long as I can keep playing. That possessive pronoun, that my money mentality. But here's the issue. Each spin of the wheel, roll of the dice are mutually exclusive from what happened previous. It's always mutually exclusive. There are no patterns. Gamblers tend to see patterns where they don't exist, right? So it's important to know that gambling is an emotional issue. It's not a failure of will. Someone's not money hungry. They're not greedy. They're struggling with an addiction. It's a brain issue. Gamblers just look at gambling differently. Their brain may not be damaged. I'm not saying they have a damaged brain. They just process it. They think about it differently than someone who doesn't have a gambling problem. And we know addiction is biopsychosocial. So there's a lot of factors that can contribute to it. Genetics, biology, environment, right? Psychology, thought processes. So we have to realize, number one, for Gambling Basics 101, gambling is a real addiction. It's similar to drug and alcohol. Even the DSM recognizes that gambling disorder is the only non-substance related disorder in the DSM. So it's on par with drug and alcohol. Doesn't mean it's equal, but it's now recognized as being on par with substance related disorders. And if you think about the clients that you treat, if any of you are treating and you deal with someone, or if you know of someone in your home that has a drug or alcohol problem, how many times will someone with a drug or alcohol problem in recovery look to switch to something else? People who have addiction tend to have certain personality traits that lend themselves to addiction, whether it's risk-taking, right? That's one of the big ones we see with gambling. So you can be in recovery from drug and alcohol and then switch to gambling. And then the gambling can send you back to the drug or alcohol addiction. So if we're in treatment, doesn't it make sense to treat the whole person, to treat all facets? We've got to get deeper, right? We've got to get deeper and treat the whole person. So let's take a look at gambling as an addiction. And I hope you enjoyed that video. I love short, powerful videos that can really help us understand what's happening in the brain as a matter, especially with gambling, when the concept of intermittent reward schedule is the foundation of gambling. You've trained the brain to know that every so often you will win something and it will feel good. You just don't know how much, how often, or when it will occur next. That's what keeps people hooked. So the definition of gambling is basically risking something of value in order to win something of value where there's risk or uncertainty. Okay, I have several slides, as I mentioned before. We're going to go through some faster than others, but at least you will have this slide deck for your reference so you can kind of page back through it at your leisure. Types of gamblers. I mentioned before, there's typically 3 types of gamblers. You have social gamblers, individuals that just find it as a form of entertainment. They gamble with others. It doesn't consume their thinking, or they're not preoccupied with the next time they'll be able to do this. They have limits, whether it's time limits or money limits. There's boundaries that they've established and they stick to them. If they're gambling, they'll also take in the other amenities at a casino or at a location where a gambling establishment offers shopping, restaurants, nightlife, whatever it might be. So it's just part of the overall experience. We estimate that roughly 90% of people can gamble socially. I don't like the word normally. I think normal is a relative term. So we'll say socially, where it doesn't create harm or problems in their life. Then along a continuum, people will start to experience gambling-related problems, and they range. It ranges from spending too much time, money, relationship problems. As it starts to go further, the lying, the deceitfulness. For those that are really struggling, they might turn to illegal activities, crime, robbery, white collar crime, right? So we want to understand that problem gamblers is where we start to see people who are gambling a bit longer than they plan to. I'm just going to go for an hour, and then 4 hours later, they're still sitting at the craps table. They lose more than they intended. Maybe they're going to the ATM. Maybe if they're online gambling, they're depositing more money into their online account. Perhaps some people start borrowing. Okay, they're starting to lie about what they're doing. So when we typically see people starting to lie about their activity, that's when the bells and whistles are going off. And then disordered gambling, that's the clinical diagnosis. When we talk DSM-5, we talk about disordered gambling. It's estimated in the last national study that roughly 1 to 2% of Americans struggle with gambling disorder. Now, 1 to 2% does not seem like a large number. That being said, I would be interested to see if that number is actually higher, because a couple of things that we've noticed in New Jersey and around the country, drug and alcohol counselors and clinicians do not always ask in full detail or at all about someone's gambling. Typically, we will see a person is in for alcohol use or heroin or cocaine or drugs, whatever it might be. So let's just treat the substance use disorder. In the state of New Jersey, we have over 2,000 drug and alcohol counselors. We have 48 gambling counselors. Now, they overlap with drug and alcohol, but the drug and alcohol counselors don't overlap with gambling. And so it becomes very concerning when we have such a large-scale difference in the number of people providing services for those struggling with gambling addiction, but are we screening properly? Are we asking the questions of people who gamble? Are we asking the right questions? Have you ever lied about your gambling to someone close to you? Have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? Are we asking the questions? I challenge you. Ask the questions, because how can we have a sustainable and meaningful long-term recovery if we have areas in our life that are not being addressed? I challenge you, ask those questions. So we need to ask more questions. And I think we're going to find the percentage of people with gambling disorder or gambling problems is actually higher than we expect. Rutgers University in 2017, 2018, in that area, did a study in the state. And what they found was that the state of New Jersey had a 6.3% gambling disorder rate. That's 3 to 4 times the national average. One of the large reasons for that is that we offer internet gambling since 2013. And when you have availability and accessibility at your fingertips 24 hours a day, that can potentially become problematic for more people. So we're very keen on the growth and the ability for people to gamble on the internet, on sports, all around the state. So we have, this would be a whole separate webinar. We have programs and outreach to stakeholders throughout the state to help try to minimize and reduce gambling related harms while still providing resources for the loved ones and family members. So what is disordered gambling? You know, what are we talking about here? We're talking about people who process gambling differently, right? It's a maladaptive pattern of wagering. It continues despite attempts to stop or control. It continues despite negative consequences. And those consequences, it could be in relationships, finances, employment. And that's where we start to see it's not someone who's greedy or someone who's just money hungry. There's a lot of stigma associated with gambling disorder. I've received in the past, when I told a couple of my close friends back in 2010 that I had a gambling problem, they said, "What do you mean you have a gambling problem? Just stop. Just stop." That was those 2 words. I hear it in my head like it was yesterday. It's not that simple. And it's hard to understand, I guess, if you don't have an addiction. I think people with drug and alcohol understand it. Someone who's been down that path or someone who struggled with something in their own life can understand addiction, and they can maybe understand a bit more gambling. But you put a gambler in an outpatient group session and they're amongst other people who struggle with substance, a lot of the substance use people may not understand. They'll say, "Gambling? Really? What is that? That's something I do on the side, but I don't have a problem with it." So I think there's a lot of stigma around gambling disorder. And it's important that we're always respectful of language, respectful of other people, to realize that we all struggle with something. If we want to be very blunt and honest, we all have this dis-ease within us. We talk about addiction as a disease, but if you break the word disease down, there's a dis-ease. There is something not at ease. And for several folks, they will look to calm those voices or deal with that dis-ease by drinking alcohol, taking drugs, marijuana, cannabis, edibles, gambling, shopping, laughing, exercise, work, you name it. A lot of people try to cover that pain and fear and vulnerability through an external substance or an external activity. So it's not that hard to understand that gambling fits in with all of those other things. Gamblers also have certain personality traits, personality types. And these are some of the character traits that you'll typically see from someone who struggles with gambling disorder. They tend to have these feelings of, they tend to be very unique. They think of themselves as very unique. No one understands me. I'm very unique. That could be a good or bad thing. They tend to be anxious, right? They tend to be sensation seeking. And the anxiety comes from that ego, right? Ego, the offspring of ego is anxiety. And anxiety is because it's focused on the self, right? What will happen to me? It's all about me, me, me. Perfectionist, charming, insecure, insecurity and anxiety. It's because the ego is so high for anyone struggling with gambling addiction or others. Here are some common characteristics you'll see, especially among sports gamblers. They tend to be very competitive. I played baseball very competitively up through high school into college. I hurt my shoulder. I was getting scouted by 2 Major League Baseball teams junior year of high school. And I didn't want to hear what the scouts had to say. They advised me to change my mechanics a little bit. I thought I knew better than they did. I'm a high school kid. I'm 17 at the time. Of course I know everything. And then sure enough, within a year and a half, 2 years, my arm just kind of gave out on me. But I was extremely competitive. And in my gambling career, when I was gambling, I love betting on sports. And that's one of the things we're seeing now as sports betting is sweeping the nation. We're seeing an uptick, a rapid uptick in the number of college students, the number of our youth that are seeing commercials on TV and are being subject to a lot of marketing where sports betting is just a fun time. It's an easy way to make money. It's a fun time with friends. It's not really gambling. I know the team. I follow the Chicago Cubs. Of course, I know they're going to lose today. Sorry, or win, right? Whatever it might be. So we have to understand that it's how gambling is marketed. Our youth is absorbing. They're sponges. And when they see a commercial that says, risk $1 and win $100 if somebody throws a strike in the baseball game tonight. Of course, there's going to be a strike thrown in a baseball game. Come on. So we have to realize that our young people are starting to become exposed. One of the common characteristics of a gambler that's emerging is that they're young males between the ages of 18 and 29. And that's concerning because one of the common themes of someone who develops a gambling problem, 2 things you'll hear. Age of onset, I started at an early age and I had a big win early. Those are 2 of the common themes. If you listen to speakers around the country, if you listen to someone sharing their story, you'll traditionally hear, yeah, I grew up around gambling. I was 10, I won $40. It felt really good. You'll tuck that away and come back to it later on. I'm always very open when I present. I grew up around gambling. I was young when I was 12 years old going to the racetrack with my father. He would win. He would give me money. Everything was great. But it was also a time that I got to spend with him. And that's a big win in the eyes of a child. A big win doesn't have to be monetary. A big win can be relational. It can be spending time with someone that you look up to, someone that you love. That can be a big win. So I had those good feelings and good views of gambling at an early age. I never saw the negatives. I didn't gamble then for a number of years. I went back to gambling after September 11, 2001. I was in my office on the 40th floor in Lower Manhattan, and I watched the second plane hit the towers and watched people jumping out of windows. And I lost 14 friends. And that was my trigger for return to use. I went back on a really long, decade-long gambling binge. It was dealing and coping with the traumatic events of 9/11 that sent me back on my gambling. People gamble for 2 reasons. And you need to understand it's about action or it's about escape. A person's looking for action in a rush, or they're looking to escape a problem that they don't know how to deal with. Maybe they don't have the right life skills, the right coping skills. They don't have the tools in the tool belt. Maybe they were never taught. Everyone comes to treatment and recovery on their own path with their own suitcase. And when you open up that suitcase as you're working with them, you get to see what they brought along with them for this treatment journey. Some people have an empty suitcase. Some people's suitcase is beaten up from years of abuse and neglect, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, PTSD, trauma. We have to understand that gambling fits into the conversation and it needs to be had. If it's something that we've never felt comfortable talking about, hopefully the slides today, you'll understand that there are similarities with drug and alcohol. You can treat it very similarly. There are differences, but there are similarities. You're not that far off. You can help change someone's life just by asking a few questions. So here gamblers kind of talk about their gambling. And these are some of the common phrases or quotes that we've heard on our 800 Gambler helpline throughout the years. One person called up and said, I don't have a gambling problem, I have a money problem. If I had more money, I wouldn't have a gambling problem. Okay. Another person said, there's nothing wrong with it because it's legal. So how can I have a problem with something that's legal? And I said, alcohol is legal, right? And there's a number of people who have alcohol use disorder. So that doesn't really work so well. My church runs a bus trip. If the church runs a trip, it can't be bad for me. The church would never do anything like that. No? Okay. We had an individual called, said, I have plenty of money. I have a job. I earn 6 figures. I don't gamble a lot. I still have my job. So do I have a gambling problem? That's one of the toughest answers for somebody who calls up and says, I have a lot of money. I have my job. I don't feel like I have a gambling problem, but my wife wanted me to call. And so I will always, it's usually relational on that one. I'll say, when's the last time you went to dinner with your wife? When's the last time you went to your children's dance class, soccer game, baseball game, right? Because that's where we tend to see that the person is starting to spend too much time on the gambling or with the preoccupation, and they're not being present in the life and the day-to-day activities. And someone can still have a gambling problem even if they have money. And then I'll get my money back on the next win. And you can see the pronoun there. I will get my money back on the next win. I know it's coming. I've been conditioned. I will win. But if you put $1 in a slot machine and you get 10 cents back, it'll say that you won. Even though you lost 90 cents, you still get that little ding, 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 10 cents. Males tend to be your action gamblers. They tend to gamble for excitement. They tend to enjoy competition. They tend to be the sports bettors, the daily fantasy players. They tend to prefer poker and horse racing, games of skill. Females tend to be the escape gamblers. And I want to be very clear. These are tendencies. I'm not saying all or nothing. I just shared with you a few moments ago that I became an escape gambler after 9/11 because I didn't know how to deal with stress and trauma and all that I saw. I thought I was fine because I was alive, but I wasn't. So hence the escape gambling. Older adults, another population. If you're dealing with seniors, if you're dealing in a senior housing complex, if you're dealing in retirement communities, we have to be concerned because we know over time cognitive decline sets in. The processing, the executive functioning, these are areas that start to show some type of decline in various areas. So we want to make sure that older adults are protected. Are they receiving education about gambling? They may not have the earning power they once had. They may be retired, so they have a lot of time on their hands. We don't want someone to start turning to gambling because they have a lot of time, maybe death of a spouse. So we have to provide programs, and we have to understand that gambling can impact so many different populations, whether it's male, female, whether it's older adults, younger adults, teenagers who can now be exposed to gambling through video games, which you're going to hear. I believe you have a great presenter tomorrow talking about, I think Cam Adair here. He's going to be talking about gambling in video games. So we have to realize, and if he's not, I apologize. I speak on the national circuit so much that Cam and I usually overlap on several conferences and workshops. But kids being exposed to gambling and video games is a concern. So we have to understand there's lots of different areas that we need to cover. Some of the signs of a person with a gambling problem in the older adult community would be borrowing money, maybe not having food in the fridge, not taking prescription medication, that neglect of personal needs, secrecy. When you're asking questions, hey, where were you on Saturday for 6 hours or 8 hours? I didn't hear from you. A decline in health, withdrawal and depression. My grandparents were in a senior living facility before they passed, and they were in their late 80s, early 90s. And there was a gentleman in that facility who loved playing bingo every day. Every chance he got, he played bingo. And they offered it in the AM and the PM. He was there for both. And he always was just so happy to be there. I was visiting my grandparents one day and he was trying to sell me a picture frame because he needed money to get into to have money for the bingo game. So he was pawning off his items in hopes of raising money to play bingo. So I alerted the front desk, say, hey, I think, you need to be aware that this is going on. And what's interesting is when I've talked to older adults who love to play bingo, for example, one woman really said something that stuck out. She said, it's the only time I don't feel pain. I said, what kind of pain? She said she had arthritis. But when the bingo game started, she felt no pain in her hands because dopamine is amazing, isn't it? Isn't dopamine a wonderful chemical when we receive it organically and naturally? We can get it through laughter, through artistic expression. We get it through accomplishing goals. We get it through exercise. It makes us feel good. It anchors our learning because we know then if we feel good doing X, then I'll do X again because it feels good. But unfortunately, it can also be a pain blocker. And when you anchor your learning to know that if every time I play bingo, I don't have pain in my hands, I'm going to want to do that again and again. It helps to understand and explain why people can start to go down that path, right? A social activity can become habitual and it can become problematic for some people. We have phases of problem gambling, which I'm going to just gloss over. It's not a simple V chart, but this was developed by Dr. Robert Custer in the 80s that basically shows the progression from the winning phase where it feels good all the way down through losing and desperation to the bottom, right? I always like to think of this chart with the letter V, the letter V. And at the bottom of the letter V, that is where a person is most vulnerable. V. Vulnerability. That's the part where we can influence and impact transformation. I don't like the word change. I think change is temporary. I think change is external. I like transformation because you're transforming from the inside out. You're now helping someone create a new world where gambling no longer fits in. It's not about trying to keep it out of our life. It's about trying to create a new way of life, of living, of thinking, of believing, where it no longer fits in. It's more than just changing your people, places, and things. Those are critical, but it's also about transforming from the inside out. These are the detailed, a little bit more detailed slide on the winning phase. It starts good, it's fun, it's exciting. People start losing, they start chasing their losses, they start lying. You start seeing some personality changes. Maybe the person loved gambling, now they hate gambling, but they do it anyway. We're starting to see some problems here. And this is helpful for you to refer to. If you start having conversations with people about their gambling, you're listening for certain things in the conversation. Yeah, I used to gamble, I used to love it, but lately, not so much, right? Let's not gloss over that. Let's probe that a little bit deeper. In the desperation phase is when we start to see some really extreme behavior, asking for loans. Hey, I'll pay you back next week. I just need a little bit of money here. Not paying your rent, not buying food, potentially illegal activity. And then physical symptoms. You start to see people who aren't sleeping well. Gambling is fascinating. Dr. Timothy Fong from the UCLA Medical Studies program is a friend and great, wonderful advocate for gambling disorder and treatment. And he said something, I guess, a few weeks ago. We had recorded a radio program out east here with Craig Carton. Every Saturday morning, we do a radio show called Hello, My Name is Craig about gambling problems. We had Dr. Fong on, and he said, he doesn't ask his clients, what are you doing to not gamble today? He asks his clients, what are you doing to keep your brain healthy today? And brain health is a huge, huge factor. What are you doing to laugh? What are you doing to find joy? What are you doing to eat properly? Are you having a good balanced diet? How's your nutrition? Are you getting exercise? Are you getting enough sleep? It's amazing when we start looking at people who are with severe gambling problems, the lack of sleep that also comes along for the ride because of the excessive gambling, the preoccupation, the thinking. So now you're not getting good sleep. You're not resting your brain. You tend to also be on fight or flight on a more regular basis. So you're producing high amounts of cortisol, none of which is good for the body in excessive quantities. So what are we doing to stay healthy today? I think that's a really critical question that we can ask our clients struggling from any addiction or any dis-ease, if you will. As we move through the phase of disordered gambling, we have the rebuilding phase where we start working with our clients for goal setting, realistic planning, right? Accomplishing goals can produce dopamine. Don't gloss over a goal. When a client accomplishes a goal, that's a good thing. It's a really good thing. Help celebrate that. But we also have to recognize that gambling can come along for the ride with substance use disorder, but also mental health. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Today is Mental Health Action Day. Take a little time today to do something for your mental health. It could be going for a walk during the lunch break, calling a friend, right? Do something to help with your mental health. That's the challenge for each and every one of us today. What we recognize is that if you do not treat the entire person, then the ability to have a sustainable and meaningful long-term recovery is at risk. People are less likely to recover from addiction when their co-occurring illness is left untreated. Some of the conclusions from a 2014 SAMHSA advisory publication was that those people diagnosed at the time, the term was compulsive or pathological gambling. It's now moved to gambling disorder. We see connection though. Don't you see the connection? Those with gambling disorder, 73% had an alcohol use disorder, so gambling and drinking. 38% had drug use or substance use disorder. 60% had a nicotine dependency. Mood disorder, anxiety, personality, talk about bipolar. So there's a lot of connected conditions. We have to understand people are struggling, and when they struggle with one area, there's usually a few other areas that are also going on. We don't just want to treat the one area that we see. But here's part of the concern from a National Gambling Impact study that was done in 1999. What you quickly realize from being on this webinar today, I'm using some statistics that seem really old, and some of them really are. Gambling does not have federal funding. And as gambling sweeps the nation, it's up to states. It's state by state decision in terms of legislative bills, advocacy, getting the proper funding for prevention, education, treatment, recovery support services. It's at the state level. It is so critical and paramount that we set the right monies aside to give the gambler, the person with a gambling problem, and the loved ones the help and the support that they deserve. It's critical. It produces a better, well-rounded experience. It helps society. We have to realize that gambling as an addiction is a public health issue. It impacts many different areas of the public health sector. So one of the concerns is that fewer than 8% of people will ever seek or receive treatment services. Some of that can be lack of ability, lack of supply rather, lack of knowledge. Are people aware that there is help and treatment available for their gambling addiction? I know in New Jersey, we continue to run campaigns constantly as we expand our network of treatment providers to try to give people the help that they deserve. There's a lot of characteristics that are similar between gambling and substance use disorder, and I want to highlight some of the similarities, because as we talk about Gambling Basics 101, it's important to understand what these similarities are. They all share preoccupation, escape, those cravings, tolerance builds. The $5 wager to a person with a gambling problem kind of loses its luster over time. Now, to get the same rush or the same action or the same feeling, that $5 wager now becomes a $10 wager, a $20 wager. Now, maybe instead of gambling for an hour or two a day, they're gambling for 6 hours, right? So the time increases. So we start seeing the tolerance build just like it does in alcohol or drug use. That inability to stop even though things are going badly. And then withdrawal. Now, while both do show elements of withdrawal, I want to be clear. Withdrawal from gambling is not the same, completely the same as withdrawal from substance use. For substance use withdrawal, we have detox facilities. There could be real medical conditions that result from withdrawal from substance. Withdrawal from gambling, while there's a similarity that both experience withdrawal, you're not going to overdose from gambling. You're not going to not detox properly from gambling. So there are some subtle differences in that respect. So why do we screen for gambling disorder? Well, working bottom up, we know early intervention and treatment work. When we have a state like Illinois and other states around the country that are now expanding gambling, we need to have a comprehensive approach, from getting into the schools at an early age to talk about financial literacy with our youth, to talk about coping and life skills, so we can teach kids these subjects so that they know not to turn to drugs, alcohol, cannabis, vaping, gambling, whatever it is. We need to get to our youth early, primary prevention. Talk about, when we have programs in the schools that talk about addiction, we need to add gambling in there. It's across the country. It's been going on for centuries, since the beginning of time. Let's have a topic on gambling disorder, gambling fallacy, right? The thoughts, the irrational beliefs. Let's help educate our youth at an early age so that they have those tools in their tool belt as they move through life. When we don't address gambling issues early, it decreases treatment effectiveness and potentially could add to further costs down the line. So when we're expanding gambling, education works, prevention works, but then we also need to have marketing so that people know where the recovery services are. We need to have educational programs for teens, for adults, for older adults. As I mentioned before, those at-risk populations all need to be addressed, and programs need to be tailored to deliver topics that can speak to the individual. Older adults want to understand why gambling problems exist and how they see it in themselves and what they can do for help. Teens, you have to talk to teens a little bit differently. Parents, you have to have a different conversation for parents. Then you have to think about culturally, being culturally sensitive. Certain cultures see gambling much differently than other cultures. Are we delivering programs that are effective? Another reason to screen for gambling problems, the client may not acknowledge gambling as a problem in the first interview. If you've worked with clients and you've asked them questions on intake about their drug and alcohol and their history, they may gloss over the gambling. They may not think it's part of the issue because they're there for a substance and gambling is just this activity that happens on the side. So they may not see it as a problem. Oftentimes it might come up later on as you're developing your therapeutic alliance with the client, as you're building your rapport. Over time, you might start hearing certain areas. In the criminal justice realm, we know that we really need to be addressing gambling among our forensic population and among our criminal justice population, because gambling in prison happens on a daily basis. Gambling in jail happens on a daily basis. It's constant. So we need to screen and alert and educate people about the harms of gambling. There are over 27 instruments to screen for problem gambling. You can pick and choose from so many, but there's a few that are really, really common. And I'm going to gloss through this. DSM-3 originally classified gambling as pathological. DSM-4 put it under impulse control. DSM-5 finally elevated it to gambling disorder. So one of the screens that people oftentimes use to ask if someone has a gambling problem is the DSM-5. There's a 9-question gambling screen that you can ask of a client. And if they answer yes, or they can identify with 4 to 5 of those, they're considered to have mild gambling disorder. If they can identify with 6 or 7, they have moderate. And if it's severe, it will be 8 or 9. So we have a mild, moderate, severe component to the DSM-5 gambling screen. Another screen that's really helpful is the Lie Bet. But before we go into that, take a look here. Here are the 12, over the 12-month period, here are the 9 questions. We recognize a person has to gamble larger amounts of money, right? Feeling restless or irritable, unsuccessful attempts to stop. The preoccupation is question 4. After gambling, they feel anxious, guilty, or helpless. They look to chase in question 6. The lying is 7. And then you can see the losing the job and then the bailout. Those are the 9 questions of the DSM-5. 4 to 5 is mild, 6 to 7 moderate, and severe is 8 or 9. This is one of the best screening tools to use. There's also the South Oaks gambling screen, which has been around since the 1980s. It's based on DSM-3 criteria, a little bit outdated, but it's a comprehensive instrument. The Lie Bet is one of the quickest gambling screens that you can use. 2 questions. Have you ever lied to someone close to you about your gambling? Have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? Those 2 questions. Lied to someone close to you and felt the need to bet more and more money. If an individual answers yes to either of those 2 questions, then you should look to do a more robust gambling screen. I would love to see takeaway today from participants where they implement the live bet screening in their practice, in their agency. It's 2 quick questions. It won't take you more than 10 seconds. It could save someone's life and it can change someone's treatment outcome. As we go through the South Oaks, I listed, and for the essence of time, I just want to get to the last point, which is Gamblers Anonymous. As we talk about gambling expansion and gambling basics, we've identified what some of the common personality traits, we've identified various at-risk groups, we've talked about the definition of gambling, we've seen why it can become so problematic for people based on what's happening in the brain. But on the recovery side, we've talked about treatment, individual clinical treatment, screening questions, but also Gamblers Anonymous. It's a 12-step fellowship. It's mutual aid, it's peer support. We find people have best recovery when they can have multiple roads of recovery. You want to have a sponsor, perhaps. You want to have a trusted friend. Maybe it's a pastor, maybe it's a loved one, maybe it's a spouse, a brother, a sibling, whatever it might be. You want to have those life skills, those coping skills, improved, refined, constantly worked on. You want to have many outlets. Maybe you like to cook, maybe you like to exercise, right? But the 12-step recovery program of Gamblers Anonymous is one road. There's also Smart Recovery. There's Addictions Victorious. It's one of many offerings for mutual aid. It helps a person feel as if they're not alone. They can be accepted by others. They can identify to say, yes, I have a gambling problem and I'm sitting next to a brother or sister in recovery who can identify with me. Peer support matters. But one of the unique features of Gamblers Anonymous is the pressure relief. And what that does is it helps take a person's current financial situation, the expenses, the bills, the debts, the income, because we know one of the unique features of gambling addiction is that it typically carries a high financial burden. And so pressure relief will help the individual start to think through and figure out how to repay the creditors, how to allocate the budget. And it's a really important component because this feeling of overwhelming, crushing debt can send someone right back to gambling. Because why? Their brain has been conditioned to know that every so often they will win something. They just don't know how much, how often, or when it will occur next. And just like the gambler needs a fellowship in recovery for peer support, so do the family members. This is so critical. That dollars are allocated, that resources are available, that meetings are available for peer support for the family members. Gam-Anon has 3 main principles. The family member did not cause the problem, they cannot control the problem, and they cannot cure the problem. And the family member needs to understand and have another support network like themselves where they can say, I need help. I can't stand my husband/wife for all that they did. I've heard family members, I hate them, I want them dead. I don't know what to do next. Gambling wreaks havoc across the entire family because oftentimes the family member and loved ones are left to clean up the baggage. Because one of the principles and one of the guiding beliefs in Gamblers Anonymous is that the gambler should not have control over the finances. That should go over to the family member. And think if you're a spouse who's never really done the bills or didn't really think too much about that, this tremendous burden is now placed on the family member. It could be really hard to deal with. We always say it's important for the gambler to come clean and be honest and have an open, honest conversation. It makes a gambler feel better when they can start to become honest about their addiction. But we're now taking this weight off the shoulder of the gambler, and now we're putting this weight on other people. And some people aren't able to burden that weight. They definitely can't burden it alone. It's always easier to carry a heavy weight with 2 people than it is with 1. But for the family member who's getting all of this information, it can be crushing. Gam-Anon is an important support group. Besides GA and Gam-Anon, there's Rational Recovery, there's Smart Recovery. And what we're starting to see now as we take the last slide here is we're starting to see more states offer the concept of self-exclusion. Self-exclusion is a voluntary process where the individual can sign up and choose to block him or herself from gambling activities. So whether that means going to the casino in person, whether it means not being able to log on to an online casino, you can choose to block yourself. More importantly, Voluntary self-exclusion will also stop the marketing offers. It stops the mail. It stops the free comps. Hey, come visit our facility and get $20. Come down here for the free room buffet and gambling comps. The marketing stops because that can be what the inducement or the enticement that sends someone right back to their gambling addiction. In New Jersey, we've seen such a rapid rise in sign up for self-exclusion. It was 3,000 people had signed up as of maybe 3 years ago. We're up to 13,000 people signing up for self-exclusion because they just don't want to have this ability to gamble on their smartphone. It's a great decision. It's a great road bump. Doesn't solve the problem. But for people who are worried about their gambling, voluntary self-exclusion is a wonderful, wonderful policy. So as we close responsible gambling guidelines, we always encourage people set a time limit, make your own decisions. Don't gamble because you want others to do so. Don't use gambling to avoid negative feelings or to escape, right? We saw that today, and I've shared that with you firsthand. Don't gamble with money set aside to pay everyday expenses. Accept the losses as the cost of entertainment. Don't go back trying to chase your money. That personal possessive pronoun will come through loud and clear if you're talking with a client who started to develop a gambling problem. And always have a conversation. Talk to someone you trust. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, reach out for help. Whether it's the local helpline, a national helpline, have a conversation. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. Mental health and addiction go hand in hand. For those struggling with addiction, we see the impact on their mental health. Let's help them recover the best way possible by addressing all facets of behavior and potential addiction, to include gambling. I want to thank you very much, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen as we're about 8 minutes to the top of the hour.
All right, well, thank you,
All right,
Dan.
Jim.
We appreciate that. I know you haven't had a chance to really see all the chat, but you've got a lot of great comments that have been coming through. A lot of people are really appreciating it and appreciating all the information you've given. I am going to take a minute, though, and just announce that we are going to launch a poll here. This is your attendance poll, so that should be coming through here any second. And while that poll is coming through, Dan, I'm going to give you your first question. So we've got a few that are really starting to pop up in the Q&A section, but the first question that came through was, could you just say the phases again, especially phase one?
Oh, the winning phase was phase one. Yeah, the winning phase, the losing phase. Hold on, I'm actually going to do even better. Hold on. Let's do the phase. I'll even put the chart back on. Excuse the scrolling, but this is the best way to do it. There's the chart of compulsive gambling and recovery as developed by Dr. Robert Custer. And this will be available on the PDF. So you will have access to all of this for those that are interested. But it usually starts off in the winning phase. Gambling, for those that develop the problem, it's very common to know that it started with a good feeling, an early win. And remember, age of onset matters because of the brain development with the prefrontal cortex, right? Decision making is that last piece that develops in the mid to late 20s, assuming no other neural disruption. And it feels good. You anchor that learning at an early age, and you're off and running. There was a gambler I talked to yesterday on the phone. His first bet was a $5 bet, and he won $250. He hit a horse at 50-1 odds racing. And from that time on, it just started a spiral of gambling.
So our next question, what about the devices that the young people are growing up with today? Really, the research that's out there shows that they are at greater risk for gambling in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're living in the time of research right now. We're living in a study period, honestly. We're seeing from the Xbox, the PlayStation, the video games, the social casino games, the apps, gambling components or gambling elements, gambling mechanics are working their way into a lot of what our kids are seeing. For example, there might be video games where you have to spin a wheel in order to win something. Now, there's no money involved, right? There's no real money involved, so it's not technically gambling, but the mechanics are there. The risking of virtual coins in hopes of winning more virtual coins, risking nothing in hopes of winning something. We're seeing our kids become more exposed to the concept that gambling is a fun activity, it's social, and there's very little risk or harm. I would even take it a step further that if we're talking to younger people, we want to be careful how we talk about gambling, because you may ask someone, do you have a gambling problem? They'll say, no, I don't have a gambling problem. I just bet on sports. Do you hear the subtle change in language there? They don't gamble, they bet. And so we have to be current and consistent with our language, because I've talked to many people in the 12 to 17, from middle school to high school. They don't gamble, they bet. Wait, what's the difference? To an adult, we know they're the same thing, but to a child, to a young person, they don't see the difference. Gambling is what my grandfather did. I don't do that. I'm smarter. I'm betting on sports. So we have to be careful how we approach it and make sure that we're getting the right answer. Our answers, our feedback is only as good as the questions that we ask. If we're not asking the question in the right way, we're not going to get good feedback.
And is there any way or future talk to self-exclude from all the little places that have video poker and slots, all the mom and pop shops, if you will, that are out there?
Yeah, as of right now, and I can only speak to New Jersey, we don't offer the little stuff. We offer the major casino operators you can self-exclude from. It would have to be part of state policy. It would have to be legislated in, I would imagine. I would imagine that would be the route it would have to go. And to not walk into a mom and pop shop, I'll be very clear. Self-exclusion works better for the internet than it does for the brick and mortar locations, because you can block someone's IP address. You can block their access from an online account. But if I put a hat on and some sunglasses and I change my look, I can walk into a casino or a mom and pop shop. You may not recognize me. Short of taking a picture and then thumbing through a book for every customer that walks through, you would need facial recognition technology to do it properly. And the costs and the expenses to install all that, I just don't, in the current infrastructure, I just don't see that happening. It's really difficult to enforce. Now, you can have infractions. If someone's found gambling after being on self-exclusion, then they forfeit any winnings, they forfeit any money, and they're subject to trespassing violations and a fine. That's typically what we see if you're in violation of self-exclusion. But to actively enforce it, to block people, becomes very difficult.
And we have another question about New Jersey. How has sports gambling gone in New Jersey recently?
Oh, what a great question that is. Before 2018, sports betting, I can talk from our helpline. I want to talk about the helpline calls, because the revenue numbers month over month have just been blowing through the roof. So we know sports betting is taking off. Over $6 billion wagered last year on sports. And so what we see, though, we measure our sports betting through the helpline calls. Before 2018, those calling with a sports betting related problem averaged 4 to 8% per year on our helpline. So not a lot. Since 2018, the people calling indicating that sports betting is their primary reason for their problem is now ranging from 16 to 20%. So we have availability, accessibility, because you can do it through your phone, your mobile device, your tablet. And we have more people calling saying, listen, I opened an account. It felt really good, but I didn't realize I'm spending a lot of time and a lot of money. It's now starting to create problems in my life. I need to sign up for self-exclusion. I don't want to have this on my phone anymore. That's what we're really seeing. We're seeing people signing up for self-exclusion primarily on the internet side, because they don't want to have this accessibility on their phone, because they're getting so entrenched. Sports betting is not about gambling at the start of a game and waiting for an outcome. It's about betting during the game. Will the next pitch be a strike? Will there be a home run hit in the next inning? You can bet consistently. And we're going to be talking about that a bit more at the panel a little bit later on. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So we've seen rapid rise in people calling for help, participation, activity, marketing. Sports betting's taken off in New Jersey.
And I'll say we probably have time for maybe one more question if someone has something that's out there. But while we're waiting on it, I do want to point out a couple of things that came through, strictly not as questions, but as comments. A couple of folks put in some comments about couponing, extreme couponing as gambling, in addition to playing bingo, which I thought was interesting additional items to what you had said previously, Dan. And one person even mentioned that they're not enjoying watching UFC lately due to all the references to odds and wagering and all
Yes.
the ads that are coming through that are really trying to impact and just pull you in, if you will.
Yes, and yeah, great point, Jim. And I just want to close on that point. I was actually in my recovery. I've been a triathlete for 18 years. I love swim, bike, run, racing nationally, half Ironman, different distance races, etc. I was talking to a friend of mine who owns a bike shop in northern New Jersey, and he knows the work that I do, and he listens to our podcast every Saturday morning. And he said, I was getting pizza down the street from my house, and I got the pizza box, and he said there was a FanDuel sports betting ad on the pizza box. This local little pizza shop, mom and pop shop. And he said to the pizza owner, he said, I don't like this. It's everywhere I look. He goes, there should be a Leaning Tower of Pisa on a pizza box, right? Or a person in a canal in Venice. That's what should be on a pizza box. Shouldn't have a FanDuel sports betting promo. So that concern that was voiced about UFC is not alone. We are getting more people calling saying, can we just take the odds off the TV? This is ridiculous. So there's a lot more to come. Stay tuned. Gambling is an exciting field to be focusing on these days. So hopefully you learned something new today, and I look forward to seeing you a little bit later on for sports betting panel, and come visit me for the day trading panel too, where we'll talk about day trading and gambling.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. And we do look forward to seeing you later on. And I
Great.
will also point out that we're going to have a 10-minute break now. And so we're going to get back together at 10:10. So I guess technically it's 9 minutes looking at my clock right now. But come back, join us at 10:10. So we have a great session coming up on women and gambling. So we'll see you in just a few minutes. Thanks, everybody.